Remote work has made people lazy. The average hours worked per day has dropped from 8.2 hours per day in 2019 to just 5.7 hours per day in 2023. In other words, remote/hybrid workers, which now encompasses a third of all Americans, work less than 30 hours per week on average. It's no wonder why some companies like Tesla and Apple are adamant that people return to the office. But most companies and even the government are just rolling with it. Take Google for example. Back in 2021, they had all this press about returning to the office. But just last month, they basically officially gave up on this effort by putting 1.4 million square feet worth of office space up for a sublease. But why are companies putting up with this? Clearly, people tend to work less from home. Well, though people do tend to work less total hours, they actually tend to be more productive. They don't have to worry about spending an hour on commuting each way, or packing lunch, or buying lunch, or waking up super early, or any of the other cons that come with in-person work. They're able to focus on just work itself, making them more efficient and productive for the hours that they do work. In fact, it's estimated that the modern hybrid economy is 5% more productive than the traditional in-person economy. As such, some companies are even taking this to the next level by experimenting with 4-day work weeks and even 20-hour work weeks. The idea is that while people work substantially less hours, overall productivity shouldn't change all that much. This brings up the question, are 30-hour and 20-hour work weeks the future of office jobs? Well, I believe the answer is absolutely. In fact, I think it's just a matter of time until a big tech company experiments with such a schedule officially. You see, smaller work weeks don't just work from a logical perspective, but from a cynical perspective as well. So join me as we take a look at how smaller work weeks will not only make tech companies more productive, but infinitely more profitable. For starters, working 8 hours a day is complete BS for most office workers. Most of the time, they're just waiting on someone else, sitting in useless meetings, or just working slowly. In fact, during an 8-hour workday, the average worker only spends 4 hours and 12 minutes actually doing work. The rest of the day is spent on surfing the internet, social media, texting, bathroom breaks, and socializing with coworkers. Now, of course, before you get mad in the comments, let me acknowledge that this isn't true for all jobs, especially those that require manual labor. If you're a mechanic or a truck driver or a plumber, this is obviously not the case. Not only can these people work a full 8 hours a day, but they can actually be more or less productive the entire time. The same, however, cannot be said about office workers. In fact, studies have found that even the most productive office workers are only able to be productive for 6 hours per day. In other words, even the most productive office workers waste 2 hours every single day. So really, there's no reason for work weeks to be longer than 30 hours per week, and remote work is proving exactly this. When people work from home, they definitely have more distractions. They might be taking care of their children, or working on a house project, or cooking, or whatever else. But despite this, remote workers are far more productive because they tend to approach work in a completely different light. When you're forced to be at work for 8 hours, you naturally tend to work slower because there's no benefit to working faster. You have to be there for all 8 hours even if you finish within 4 or 5 hours, so people tend to stretch out the work throughout the entire day. Also, when people are in person, they feel less of a need to prove themselves to their managers and bosses. Their presence itself goes a long way in showing that they're committed and working hard. When they're working from home, however, it's a whole nother ballgame. Suddenly, employees are judged solely on their output as opposed to their presence. I mean, let's be honest, everyone knows that you can just have Teams open and move the mouse every 10 minutes. So no manager really takes online hours all that seriously. It's all about progress and work output. As such, employees also tend to focus on hitting a certain milestone or getting something done within a workday, as opposed to working an arbitrary number of hours. It's actually kind of a motivating factor. If they can just focus on getting X item done, they can just be done for the entire day. So they're incentivized to work harder and more efficiently during the hours that they do work. Also, given that they now have more downtime, employees are in a much better state of mind. They're more relaxed, less stressed, and just happier in general. In fact, one study found that remote work increases employee happiness by 20%, which of course leads to more productivity. Not to mention, with remote and hybrid work, companies are able to get away with less office space, less corporate food, less electricity, less internet, basically less of everything. So it's really a win-win scenario for companies. Happier employees, less costs, and more productivity. And if you don't believe me, just take it from history. 40-hour work weeks themselves are actually a super new invention. In fact, they haven't even been around for 100 years yet. 40-hour work weeks didn't even become a law till 1940 when the Fair Labor Standards Act was amended. Before this, factory workers would generally work 12 to 16 hours a day for 6 days a week. Their only off day was Sunday so that they could go to church. This meant that the average employee was generally working about 100 hours every single week. Of course, there were activists and labor unions who were trying to bring this down for decades, but nothing really changed until Henry Ford stepped in. In 1926, Ford would become the first major company to implement a 40-hour work week. They were essentially cutting down working hours by over half, but they kept the pay the same. This was an insane development. Ford was already a top-paying company, similar to tech companies today. In fact, Ford was already paying nearly 2 times the average factory salary for both men and women. And now they were gonna cut down working hours by 60%? I mean, this was ludicrous. Surely their productivity would plummet given how labor-intensive building cars is. But this didn't happen. In fact, the exact opposite happened. Ford was already a desirable place to work, but this made Ford the place to be for the working class. The amount of pride and loyalty that Ford saw from their factory workers was unprecedented. And though they were only working 8 hours a day, Ford's productivity per hour was higher than ever. But despite this massive success, other companies were obviously hesitant in implementing a similar work schedule. The argument was, oh, it may work for Ford, but it wouldn't work for us. But over time, they too had to make it work, not because of laws or strikes or protests or any of that, but simply because of supply and demand. For obvious reasons, all of the best welders and painters and designers and inspectors flocked over to Ford and the other companies that were offering such perks. The only people left at companies like GM who were unwilling to reduce hours were people who literally had no other choice. This meant that employee morale and thus productivity fell off a cliff at these companies, so they really had no choice but to follow suit. Now, nearly 100 years later, we're met with a similar set of crossroads. Remote work has made it clear that 40-hour work weeks are very much outdated, and this is really not surprising. Thanks to automation, tech, and now AI, much of the things that humans work on aren't exactly effort-dependent. Rather, they're creativity-dependent, which is a limited resource. Just because a UX engineer at Google works longer doesn't mean that the UI will actually turn out to be more visually pleasing or intuitive. Of course, this logic is most applicable for tech companies, and that's why they'd be the ones leading the way, similar to Ford. So, while a reduction from 40 hours down to 30 hours or even 20 hours may seem crazy at first glance, it's really not. We saw a much greater decrease just 100 years ago, and that was definitely for the better. Moreover, there is a much more cynical reason for reducing working hours anyway. Even on the surface, there's obviously a lot of cynical benefits to reducing working hours. Companies like Google and Facebook can easily improve their brand image without sacrificing on productivity or progress. Similarly, they can reduce operating expenses by spending less on office buildings, but all of that is just a bonus. There is a much darker reason to reduce working hours that Henry Ford was well aware of. By substantially increasing wages and decreasing working hours, Ford ensured that his employees not only had time to enjoy the benefits of a car, but also the money to afford a car. Before this, only the wealthy could afford cars, which substantially limited Ford's reach. But by making this pivot, Ford was not only able to make cars affordable for his own employees, but the entirety of the working class across America. Fun fact, cars were more affordable for low-level factory workers at Ford 100 years ago than they are for the average American today. Ford was paying a minimum wage of $5 per day, which meant that it would take a Ford employee at most 11 weeks to afford a $260 Model T. Today, the median income in the US is $44,000. But to even afford a base-level Toyota Corolla, it would take 26 weeks of income. No wonder cars became so popular, but anyway, tech companies today are in the perfect position to do the exact same thing, but with tech. These companies are very much the Ford of the 21st century. They have the most power, control, and influence, so you can bet that if they reduce working hours, other companies will be forced to follow along, not just within the US, but internationally. Sure, work hours may not drop all the way to 20 hours across the world. For countries that tend to work more, hours may drop from 100 to 80 or 80 to 70. Given that most tech companies operate off of free products, they don't even need people to have more money, they just need people to have more time. In an ideal world, a 20-hour work week would mean that people spend more time with family and friends and on trips and relaxation and all of that. But you can bet that if a 20-hour work week were to actually be implemented, most people would just spend more time on their phones and social media. And guess who owns these platforms? It's of course the tech companies. Right now, the average person only spends 2 hours and 31 minutes per day on social media. But with the 20-hour work weeks, this could easily go up to 4 or 5 hours per day, which would essentially double the income of these platforms. So it really doesn't even matter if shorter work weeks marginally affect the productivity of these companies. They'd essentially be trading 10 or 20% less productivity from their 100 or 200,000 employees in return for hours of time from billions of people. And the best part is that they'll look like the good guys who are on the employee side. It's really a 200 IQ move. As Henry Ford declared, every man needs more than 1 day a week for rest and recreation, to buy Model T cars. Similarly, tech companies can declare, every person needs more than 16 hours a day for rest and to use our platforms as much as possible. As this is the real reason that companies will push for shorter and shorter work weeks and embrace remote work. Simply, it makes more business sense. Something else that's counterintuitively more profitable is giving up profitability. Check out this video to learn more, but until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.